Welcome to the Coaching Revealed podcast series on health and wellness coaching. I'm one of the podcast hosts, Emily Tarani. In today's episode, Dr. Pamela Larde, IOC Director of Education, sits down with Dr. Heidi Hanna, author, researcher, and the stress detective. Dr. Hanna shares her personal journey through challenging times, including navigating the pandemic and overcoming health struggles. Despite facing adversity, she emphasizes the importance of curiosity and finding humor in difficult situations. Dr. Hanna's holistic approach to brain fitness emphasizes 5 pillars: eat, sleep, move, connect, and rest. And she and Dr. Pamela discuss practical strategies for improving mental well-being. The discussion specifically highlights the power of connection and the role of energy in professional and private life. We close out the episode looking at how coaches can play a pivotal role in helping individuals develop self-awareness and navigate intense moments by providing support, listening, and offering resources. Thank you for tuning in to Coaching Revealed. Let's get started.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Pamela Larde, and I'm here with our amazing podcast, Coaching Revealed. And I am joined today by Dr. Heidi Hanna. And I'd like to take a second to introduce who she is. She's been featured at many national and global conferences, including the Fortune Magazine Most Powerful Women in Business Summit, ESPN Women's Leadership Summit, and the $1 Million Roundtable. Now, she is the Chief Energy Officer of Synergy Brain Fitness, a company providing brain-based health and performance programs to individuals and organizations, a founding partner for the Academy for Brain Health and Performance, and a fellow and advisory board member for the American Institute of Stress. She is a New York Times bestselling author of several books, including The Sharp Solution, Stressaholic, and Recharge. Her clients have included Google, Starbucks, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, and WD-40, as well as the PGA Tour and the National Football League. Dr. Hanna serves as an everyday health expert, wellness advisory board member, and a national board member and certified humor professional with Association for Applied Therapeutic Humor, although she won't admit that she's funny. I can't wait. I love it. I want to hear more about this. Welcome, Dr. Heidi. How are you?
Thank you. I'm so good. It's always really funny to hear my bio read back to me because I start feeling really tired. I'm like, how did I do all of that stuff? But the good news is I've found a really good pace, and I've done some big changes in my life actually recently, moving to be closer to family up in the Northwest, and really just feeling recharged myself, which has been amazing to take time and really think about what matters most to me and, the impact that I want to make. So I'm a huge fan of IOC, always have been. I'm delighted to be part of your podcast. So thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I'm curious, based on what you just said about recharging and so forth, how did you emerge from the pandemic? There was definitely major transitions we were all experiencing. With your background in brain work and humor, did either of those skills come into play in your own experience?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so strange when you think about timing right now, and someone will ask something about a certain year, and I'm like, there's like 3-year gap where I'll be like, oh, I was just there last year. Oh, wait, that was pre-COVID. And so it's really bizarre, this collective experience that we've all had. And for me, I actually got sick before we really knew what was going on. I was doing a speaking engagement in Seattle and got sick, and I got it really bad. So for about 8 weeks, watching the news, trying to understand, couldn't get any sort of medical support because I wasn't in the demographic of high risk. So it was kind of like, tough it out. I also was in the process of moving. And so during that time, my clients really needed a lot of help, obviously. So I talk about stress mastery and dealing with difficult times, and found myself doing media interviews and videos. And of course, we weren't in person. So instead of traveling and going somewhere and being in person with people, I would do like 3 sessions a day, staring at a screen, not getting my favorite part, which is really the human connection part. And I completely fried myself. And I remember a moment, which was actually great because it was such a learning moment for me, where I would be talking like this and doing a presentation, and my eyes would just kind of go wonky on me. Like I couldn't see. And I realized I was having somewhat of a panic experience, which I actually grew up with a panic disorder, which is part of why I do what I do. So I was able to notice it, but I started just asking questions. And I've always found curiosity to be one of the cures for stress, because as soon as we get curious, the way that the brain processes is different. So we're going more towards instead of away from. And I started asking myself questions about like, what is the value at stake in this experience? And I always value people's time and energy so much, but because I wasn't with them, I wasn't getting that, feedback. And so I started to really just focus more on not trying to have better slides or not trying to do more research, but just really taking care of myself so that I could show up the best way that I could. And then that became something that even now I've been able to teach, which is not just trying to figure out what's causing the stress and what we can do about it, but actually appreciating the values that we have, appreciating who we are in that experience allows the brain again to shift and be more flexible, more creative. So I was able to get through it. Without getting too deep into the woods, I went through a divorce. I moved 3 times. The sickness, unfortunately, had some long haul symptoms. So it was enough that I decided to take a little bit of a sabbatical and regroup. So all that to say, coming out the other side of it, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing and spending time with family and really happier than I've ever been had I not gone through that kind of wake-up call.
Wow. And essentially what you're saying is you had human experiences. A lot of what you said are what many of us were struggling with during that time. So it's interesting to me just to kind of hear how somebody who specializes in overcoming stress and finding humor. I think humor is such an important thing that I definitely want to dive into here. How do people who are experts at these things navigate life like the rest of us humans?
And sometimes you meet experts and it's like, the humor thing. I always say, I won't admit I'm funny, because if people hear that, then they're like, oh, tell me a joke. You must be funny. But that's not, I always say I'm not a humor initiator as much as I am an appreciator. So it's a different skill set. But yes, during that time, my best friend, Karen Buxman, specializes in neurohumor, and she almost every single day will send me something funny. And then in return, I usually send her something like recharging or motivating or, sounds of the ocean. But those types of things, we call them humor habits, are really critical, because then when you're in a moment that's challenging, it's not that you make fun of your experience, and certainly don't make fun of yourself, right, but you can find the levity in things. And I know we're going to talk about it later. So, because I could give story after story after story of now the lens through which I see the world is looking for those moments. And when I find them, then I actually share them with somebody, and it becomes this kind of bonding experience that helps us to be more resilient.
I love it. It parallels beautifully with my work around joy and how it's, you look for it. When it doesn't just come naturally, you're intentional about it in ways that can help you overcome some of the more challenging moments in life. And when it becomes a lifestyle, it's just something that you do more naturally. Right. So I love that. I want to hear a little bit about brain fitness. And so I'm curious to know how you came to be Chief Energy Officer, and what does Synergy Brain Fitness actually do?
The brain fitness piece is something that I am just nearly obsessed with. And that I was working with a company called the Human Performance Institute, which was such a blessing. We taught energy management to executives and some professional athletes and things. And I was going through that kind of breakdown period. I was working so hard and traveling all the time and alone all the time. And my 3rd grandparent was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. And so I started really thinking about the impact on the brain and kind of wanting to better understand how this disease develops. And I was actually shocked at how many things are in our control. Like of the top 10 risk factors, only 2 of them we can't control, which is the sex that we're born with and the age that we have, the biological age.
Yeah.
But everything else we can do something about. And so that felt very empowering to me. And I started to write a book, something I never thought I would do. just to simplify the concepts. And since I had a physical physiology, personal training background, I started thinking about the brain that way, as in, what do we need to make the brain stronger? And there's 5 components I talk about, not rocket science: how we eat, how we sleep, how we move, how we connect with people, eat, sleep, move, connect, and rest, how we take breaks. So it's not rocket science, but how do we build that in? And then the fitness part is, what is our strength? What is our flexibility? And what is our endurance? And what are the tasks and things that we can practice to actually make our brain more effective? And the great thing about this, and it's why I'm so passionate about it right now, is that we can use this approach to improve mental health in a space where a lot of times mental health is scary to talk about, or even impossible to talk about, like with the pilots I just work with. If a pilot says that they need help with their mental health, even if it's a human experience like grief, they can lose their license and their livelihood. So I think we still need to find better ways to make it about prevention and what we can do to improve, rather than seeing somebody with a situation or challenge as being weak or flawed.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm thinking about the situation with the pilot and your language in terms of the 5 different ways to improve brain health: eat, sleep, move, connect, rest. And I'm wondering if this language could help professionals like pilots say, instead of I'm having mental health issues, I need better connections, or I need rest, or and that way being able to point, and first of all, I'm sure it takes a lot of self-awareness to even recognize that. But I think that the work you do seems to give people the language they need to be able to use those words rather than the general mental health word that seems to scare everybody.
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is also where coaching comes in, and it's so critical, because I learned pretty early on, even though I did coach training and I've been involved with coaches and I love the coaching field, that my sweet spot is not in individual coaching. It's more about taking the message out and sharing it with large groups and then connecting them back. Yes. And so I think it's important then to have, a whole collective group of people who then can speak that same language so that it feels safe. And that was one of my points with this amazing organization. It was the National Business Aviation Association, and they're really leading the charge on thinking differently about a lot of these topics. In fact, their whole leadership conference was all wellness oriented, which I really applaud. I'm hoping to continue with them with some advocacy and bringing more like wellness coaches in who wouldn't go into the clinical discussions, but could identify where we can add some support and some structure for somebody. And then if it gets to the point where they need clinical intervention, they can have that conversation in a safe space and in a way that isn't going to feel threatening to the individual, because right now their options are so limited. You would be surprised how many of them came up to me in tears talking about colleagues they've lost and people who've really struggled, who just didn't see any other way out.
I mean, I really love these 5 components or elements, because when I go out and I do speaking engagements and people come up to me, I can probably point to one of those 5 things that is the root of some of the challenges that they're facing.
Connection is so powerful. In fact, I think it's probably the most powerful of all the 5 factors. And yet it's challenging to talk about. But we know, and I'm sure the listeners have heard, that feeling lonely is worse for your health than smoking cigarettes every day. And this is where I kind of use humor, because I'm like, now I'm not telling you to go smoke with your friends, but we know the negative ramifications of smoking cigarettes or drinking too much or eating too much or not enough. Like, we know all of those things. But even if we're surrounded by people, we can feel lonely, and we may only have 2 or 3 deep connections and feel deeply connected. So this is where the perception of the brain is so important. There's things that we can do to even feel more connected when we're not, like handwritten notes or FaceTime, prioritizing those things, putting things around our environment that remind us of the people we love, all those little things. But when you're stuck in it and you're feeling lonely and isolated, it's really hard to climb out. So I think, again, coaches have a real special place in being able to identify something that person's probably never even thought of as a pillar of health.
Another word that I wanted to come back to that you mentioned a few times was energy. I don't think this is necessarily an issue in the world of coaching, but you have some people who are like, "Ooh, energy! Oh, they're woo woo woo." So, talk to us about what you mean by energy and how that is an important part of our roles as professionals or even our private lives.
Oh my gosh, everything is energy. And again, I'm grateful for, the studies that I did, the Human Performance Institute work that I did. We talk so much about, our most valuable resources being time and energy, but we can have time without energy. Most people have sat in a meeting, a discussion, whatever it is, and their energy's been somewhere else. So when I say energy, I'm talking about things that are actually measurable energy factors. So physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, social. And then I would say in some ways, you could even look to things like organizational, financial, all of these components. And really, all stress is when demand exceeds capacity in one of those areas. So we know that stress isn't bad. And in fact, short-term stress is really good for us and it helps us grow. But instead of just saying like, I'm stressed, it's really important to become what I call a stress detective, which is like, I feel this, but what's really going on? Is it my physical energy that isn't at the capacity it needs to be? Or is it, emotional, mental? And you can go through all those different factors. Obviously, they all support each other in some way. So that's actually the word synergy that I came up with was all about that. How do we get all of those working as effectively as possible? With our corporate athlete program at HPI, we noticed that the professional athletes spend like 80% of their time on the physical, whereas the corporate athletes spend maybe 20% or less, but they don't realize how much that impacts everything else. So really focusing on breathing and movement and sunlight, if you can find it. I joke now because I lived in San Diego for 16 years and now I live up in northern Idaho, Washington area, and I get fake sunlight because I go do red light therapy. We need to prioritize those types of things, even physical touch, getting a massage. When I went through a really horrible 2-week panic attack in and out of the hospital, this was many years ago, I came out, I knew I had to quit my job because my 2 biggest fears are flying and public speaking. So I was like just overwhelmed. And then I decided to start getting massage as if it were a prescription from a doctor. And I go every week. Sometimes if I'm traveling too much, I'll do like 90 minutes the following week. But it is a prescription for reducing stress hormones and even feeling connection with another person. As strange as that may sound, I'm like, I'm paying somebody to give physical touch in a very healing, therapeutic way.
You've spoken about anxiety a couple of times and your own experience with anxiety. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that from the time that you were younger and when you first started experiencing it to when you realized, no, this is something that actually needs to be addressed.
Oh my goodness. We have seen in the research that about 15 to 20% of the population is considered highly sensitive. And if we think about that from an energy perspective, it just means we're more sensitive to things like bright lights, loud noises, smells in our environment, but also emotion. So if you take somebody with this highly sensitive brain pattern, you feel emotion deeper into the brainstem and even into the body. And if you don't know that, you assume you're like everyone else, but you're just absorbing. And I always think it's important to talk to coaches about this, because I guarantee the coaching population is going to be closer to 80%, because these are people who genuinely care about trying to help others. They are more empathetic, although I wouldn't call this an empath. That's a different situation. But the challenge of that is you're absorbing a lot of this throughout the day. And then you may not even notice that what you're feeling is the heaviness of all of that really needs to be worked out. So for me, it became super clear because I have a condition called vasovagal syndrome, which essentially means if I feel anxious or overstimulated, I will pass out. And this started around 12 years old. So I went to all sorts of doctors trying to figure out what was wrong. No one could come up with anything. And they said, it's probably just stress. And I giggle because I'm like, what the heck is stress? Like, what does that even mean? I can't leave my parents. Obviously everyone has stress. So we try to just power through it. And I think what tends to happen, and I can say for sure in my own experience, is I struggled with eating disorders. I struggled with substance use issues. I felt incredibly lonely and isolated dealing with all of that. So we're looking for kind of external things to quiet the noise. I don't think I took it super seriously until I had that kind of 2-week panic attack experience where I realized if I don't do something about this, I cannot function in life the way that I want. So it was really a choice of, do I want to keep speaking about something I'm passionate about, even though it's hard? Or do I want to just live a less intense life? And by the way, both of those are fine. But if we want to live a life that's full of energy and passion, we have to know that the flip side of that is we have to oscillate. Anything that goes up has to come down. And if we keep just driving, our body is going to tell us in some way. So anxiety to me is a very physical manifestation of stress that's been pushed down for too long. So it's overstimulated, it's worry and it's concern, but that's more the mental or cognitive experience. Anxiety is something you feel in your body, and it can be very different for different people, whether it's that hyper alertness or it's actually shutting down. A lot of digestive problems. A lot of that stuff is coming from that stress that's not been mobilized, that hasn't had a chance to come out. And so again, as coaches, I think we have to wear both hats. One is our clients might be feeling that way, of course. And so just supporting them by listening, they don't feel as alone, coming up with a strategy where they can be successful, start to get some positive motivation. But then also for us, how are we showing up? So if we're feeling anxious, we're not the only ones suffering from that, because it's highly contagious with the people around us.
That's really good. It brings up about 35 different questions, but I'll just stick to a couple. So you're saying then that you experienced decades of really unaddressed anxiety until that 2-week period. And so what is different? You've mentioned some of the practical changes that you've made. Was there anybody guiding you through that? Or is it just something that you kind of, woke up to realize?
I think that a huge part for me was a better understanding. So a big breakthrough for me was Dr. Elaine Aron's work on highly sensitive people and understanding that I was different and that was okay. And it actually turns out that highly sensitive people just have a more adaptable nervous system. So the things that are challenging affect us more, but the things that are restorative affect us more. So it's why I love humor and time in nature and music. Those types of things help me probably more than they might other people, because my nervous system is so flexible. So it gave me language to understand that this thing that felt like a curse was actually a blessing, but I had to navigate it in a really specific way. And it's no different from what I teach. It's just I have to prioritize it more. And so now when those things happen, I think I have better language. In fact, I wouldn't even call it anxiety. I usually notice it as an energy or an excitement about something that may be challenging. And I can also vocalize it to others better. So it makes it easier then to be in relationship with people. Whereas before, it was hard because I felt like I needed to go out all the time, and I needed, the TV needs to be on when you're having coffee or when you're driving in the car. And for me, I just like quiet. So figuring out how to do that, how to set boundaries and the right language around it, I think is really important.
So this is another, I think, area where coaching comes in as pivotal, because that level of self-awareness it doesn't just happen for most people. I will say that because I'm a coach and because I do a lot of this work around wellness and self-awareness, I hold myself to a higher standard in terms of being self-aware and saying those kinds of things to the people in my life, that it's not that you're frustrating me, but it's, I need a moment. I'm feeling overstimulated. But that's not something that, that's not a skill set that everybody has. How can coaches help people adopt that kind of mindset and practice it in some of the most intense moments? I mean, that's when it gets really hard.
It does. And I would say that even though I wasn't in a formal coaching environment at the time, my medical doctor, who is a dear friend of mine in San Diego, worked with me as a coach. So he was there for what I needed from a medical perspective, but he really listened and we researched things together. And he was also able to say, I don't experience that, but I hear what you're saying and it sounds really challenging. And then remind me of why that's a benefit. He would say things, it makes me emotional to think about it, but he's like, when I'm in a room and we're presenting together, there's a draw that people have towards you that I can't explain. And it's like, that's that energy thing, The challenge with that is it can be too much for me if I'm not, oscillating and kind of doing my practices. This last hurdle, when I had finally moved, and this was just towards the end of last year, I was in a really dark place because I had lost my confidence and I didn't think I could do this anymore from a different perspective. And I did hire a coach, and it has been absolutely the best decision I made. Number one, because I was humble enough to say I needed help. Number two, for me, I don't need therapy. I don't need to explore the cause. I just needed that person to be with me and to listen. And the way she pulls things out of what I'm saying as she reflects back to me, it's mind-blowing. So I think it's that listening, supporting, being a resource, all of those things are really important. And then also managing your own energy in that time.
I love that. What kind of work did you do with the NFL? I heard you mention athletes and I don't know if I've heard this right, but it sounded like you were talking about physical athletes and then corporate CEO athletes. Are they both like physical athletes, or is this just a term you're given for the brain exercise?
Yeah, no, it was a term. So actually with the Human Performance Institute, I was there for about 10 years. We worked with what we called corporate athletes. So we did body composition and blood work and talked about nutrition and physiology, but then we also talked about the positive psychology work. It was just an all-inclusive kind of 2.5 day experience. I've been fortunate. I was a college athlete, and I've been fortunate to spend some time around that world. And with the NFL, I was super blessed because I was asked to speak at their annual meeting for what's called their Playmakers group. And it was a wonderful experience talking about brain health and performance and stress and all of that kind of stuff. And then afterwards, I got just super passionate about this idea, again, of taking this out of the mental health or the concussion syndrome space, all the stuff we focus on, and just really making it about how do we build a better brain? Because if the brain's healthier, it will be more resilient to tackles, whether they're on the field or off the field. My current relationship is with somebody who I met doing mental health advocacy, and he was actually a Super Bowl MVP quarterback. I'll say his name because I don't want people to be like, oh, I A lot of people won't care. I didn't either. I didn't know who he was, but his name's Mark Rippon, and he was a Canadian football quarterback with the Redskins. And so we've been together for 3 years, and we're doing advocacy work. We were just down at the pre-Super Bowl stuff. I'm impressed by the fact that the teams are starting to take it more seriously, and they're starting to create more resources for the athletes and the families, because it's not just about, the helmet. It's about the lifestyle that they have, the experiences that they have. They have an injury, and very quickly they realize that they haven't developed, their life outside of sports. So I think it's just a good platform to be able to share a lot of this information, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Just looking at the whole person is really what I'm hearing as you're talking about the work with these different populations. From the CEO dealing with the whole person, we don't typically think of the physical health and what they eat. And with the athlete, we don't typically think about the holistic approach to life. So this is such important work. Now I want to talk about the humor. How does that come into this for you? I have a book here called The Joy of Pain. It talks about how we get enjoyment from laughing at, other people, a comedian on stage. It could be perfectly innocent. And he's talking about demographics of people and we laugh. What is it about humor that is so effective?
I think I just intuitively knew that humor was important for connections since I was really young. Again, I would never be a stand-up comic. I don't, find myself funny, but I find a lot of things funny. And I think it started actually as a coping mechanism. So the worst my experience was from a pain perspective or an injury perspective, or if I fainted, I would notice that everyone around me was so stressed or so concerned that I would just be super funny to kind of let them know I was okay. So we know that humor and laughter in particular are non-conscious cues of safety. You wouldn't be laughing if there was really something wrong. So I think even when we see, people fall or different things and we laugh, it's somewhat of a nervous reaction that's calming to ourselves that everything's okay. If it was truly a tragedy, we would not laugh. So I was thrilled. I went through a period of depression, and I was like, I haven't laughed in so long. And I stumbled across this organization, the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor, which is not a funny name, by the way. But it was like my people, because these are nerds who want to understand better how to use humor in a strategic, applied, and even therapeutic way. The research is unbelievable. In fact, we often have said that, the positive psychology movement, for example, there was so much great research and there was such a buzz around it. But as soon as we start looking at humor, even though it has a lot of these same benefits and maybe even more, is scary for people for the reasons that you shared. So it's actually one of the things we teach in Humor Academy is how to know how to use it effectively, looking at things like trust, looking at things like timing. And I always go back to the same thing, which is it's not about being funny, but it's about seeing funny. And the more you can notice things that are funny and have a safe space to share it, the better. So I actually have a whole presentation on Beyond Funny, the health benefits and business benefits of strategic humor. But I think the key is to find the easy ways to do it. Things like sharing a meme. It's like things like that where it's not controversial. It's not going to hurt someone's feelings. It's just healthy, appreciating, what's funny about life. The biggest thing is that if we're feeling stressed, if you can find something to be grateful about, or you can think of a funny experience that you've had recently, it just opens up the flexibility of the brain so that you can problem solve more effectively. So again, it's not about like dismissing what's bad or making fun of people, but being more resilient, being more creative. And it's a great way to connect with other people.
Is there a challenge, or do people experience barriers with freeing themselves to experience humor? I know with joy, people they're afraid sometimes because they've been taught not to overly express themselves. Does that also exist with humor?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it could be that they've had bad experiences before. I think it's important to create a safe space for that. So as I mentioned, my friend will send me things. We know each other's humor. I mean, the last year or so, everything's about cats because I have a kitten. So, it's like if you know something about someone and can kind of speak their humor language to some extent, it can be really powerful. But you can also just ask somebody. I love to do this at the beginning of a meeting, is just have people turn to each other and share something funny that's happened recently. And the energy in the room gets better. But even if they can't come up with something, then later on they're kind of looking for something, which is what we would like to see happen. So, as you get more brave with kind of bringing your filter down, you're not always going to hit a home run. This last week was funnier than I've ever been at my speaking engagement. I had such a great time, and I'm so grateful again to my coach for helping me through that self-esteem challenge that I had. But you know what? I said one thing, and it was actually something about like, I'm not blonde, it's like a blonde joke reference. And as it came out of my mouth, I was like, you know what? That could actually offend someone. I don't even know why I said that. I think when we're doing this from a place of authenticity and playfulness, that comes through as well. It's like they had already had a chance to get to know me. No one got up and walked out of the room, but I was aware of it and thought like, okay, next time I'm going to keep that one to myself.
How do you recover from an offer of humor or, an expression of humor that didn't work?
I use a lot of depreciating humor and not putting myself down. But what I said, because I caught it as I was saying it, and I was like, oh, wait a second, I didn't mean that. I mean, I actually highlight my hair, so I kind of want to be a blonde, or something to just kind of smooth it out and just be human about it. Beyond that, it's kind of at that point done. So I think that, again, it wasn't poorly intended. It really wasn't the worst thing in the world to say. I think people know like this person's human. I wasn't going off of a script. And it really does come down to relationships.
And that's key is that back to the connection and establishing that trust. And I think that would be the case for any type of new level of relationship you're trying to create, which, humor is part of that process. We are coming close to an end. And what would you say is the most important takeaway for a coach?
I would say the most important thing to me that could come out of this conversation is for coaches to realize how important it is for them to take care of themselves. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but you're the kind of vehicle that could provide so much help and healing for the people you're working with, whether it's one-on-one or a group, whatever it is. And I think to really prioritize that and think about what you need to show up as your best self. And with coaching, if you're doing, appointments and conversations, there's a little bit of a container where you can build in some of these rituals. I have a recharge toolkit, and I always recommend people like take that and actually map into your day when you're going to do what you're going to do, how long it's going to be, to really start to oscillate more effectively. And don't get caught in the trap of time. Because remember, time without energy is void of value. And sometimes it can actually do more harm than good. If we're just showing up, going through the motions, it's not going to work out. So the better you feel, the better your energy is, the more present you can be, the more effective you can be. And then from that place, I think we just create a safe space for other people to talk. We listen the best that we can, and then we provide resources, or if there's a tough conversation around something like mental health, I think it's super important to have some practitioners that you trust to be able to refer people to and stay on their team. Don't say, okay, well, this is clinical, so I'm going to refer you out. Like, you can continue to coach them as they're having some of those maybe deeper, more medical conversations with someone else.
It would probably, in fact, be a relief to be able to go back to the coach after having, some of those conversations.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your insight today. As I mentioned before, are these the 3 books, or is there anything else? I see as if it's not enough. The Sharp Solution, Stressaholic, and Recharge.
Yes, and I will add one. I actually have 7, but it's whatever. I went through a spurt where I just couldn't stop writing, and now I'm like, but there is one, and I think it's only like $4 or something. There is one called "What's So Funny About Stress" that I wrote with a friend of mine. So we talk about some of the stress physiology, but we also talk a lot about humor habits, how to feel safe using humor, and a lot of these books too. I have. So if someone's not able to buy one and they want to read it, again, just reach out. I'm happy to share a PDF copy of whatever I can.
That's perfect. Well, thank you again. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you all have also enjoyed this conversation. Heidi has said several times, reach out. Make sure you mention IOC.
Yes, please.
I'm assuming LinkedIn is probably the best social media way to reach you. Yes. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or your evening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Tarani with Coaching Revealed.